pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, good evening. This is the meeting of the Morrison County Planning Commission. The commission is made up of citizens from the 5 commissioner districts of the county. The purpose of this commission is to oversee the preparation of the Morrison County land use controls, hear and review applications, and offer recommendations for conditional use permits, interim use permits, subdivision plat approval, plan unit developments, rezones, and other matters to be considered by it under the Morrison County Land Use Control Ordinance. Our powers are established in State Statutes Chapter 394.21 through 394.37. Conditional uses and interim uses are recommended for approval upon a showing by an applicant that standards and criteria stated in the ordinance will be satisfied. All questions must be answered in affirmative in order for the Planning Commission to recommend approval for a conditional use permit or an interim use permit. Unless conditions can be attached that bring the proposed use into compliance and mitigate the negative finding of fact, conditions and restrictions may be imposed by the Planning Commission as deemed necessary to protect the public interest. After your public hearing is complete, you may leave if you wish. Okay, we have 3 items on the Planning Commission side and 1 on the Board of Adjustments later on, so we got kind of a busy night. So just to let you guys kind of know how we're going to do this ordinance thing. Amy's going to go through the staff report and go through kind of section by section. She's going to open up for discussion for our board. When we get through that, then we will have public comment, questions. Anybody have anything they want to say? At that time, I'll ask for public comment. You work your way up to the podium, and you have to speak into the mic. We would like you to state your name for the record, and then proceed with what you guys would have to say. So if you hear something as we're going through tonight, the best way is make some notes, please. Then when we get through that, we'll get through that. And please, I know it's a big crowd, so if you guys could just keep it down, it'll help us get through this a lot faster because we've got a huge night tonight. So with that, first item on the agenda is the proposed land use ordinance amendments. And at this time, I turn it over to Amy and staff with the ordinance proposed changes.
All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you for showing up. So we're going to go through the proposed ordinance amendments. There were hard copies. If you need more, let me know. Does anyone need a hard copy? No? Okay. So I've got it on the screen and then also in front of you for those that have a hard copy. So Section 200 is our rules and definitions. So the changes that we are proposing to that is for just striking the agriculture preservation area. That is a term that is not referenced in the ordinance, and so it does not need to be a defined term. So that is the reason why we're looking at removing that. The other area is the definition of cluster development. With the other proposed changes that we are looking to make in the agriculture zoning district, there will be no need for cluster development, so there would be no need to define it. So that is why it is struck in the definitions. So that is the 2 definitions that we are looking to make changes for Section 200. Any questions? No? Okay, then I'm going to move to Section 500. Section 500 pertains to variances. The section here in 505.1A is really an add back of language that inadvertently came out during the overhaul of this section last year. So we are adding back the language that if a variance request to encroach on a property line, a survey of the property line in question must be provided with the application. So we're adding that language back in order for someone to ask for a variance to encroach on the property line, they need to be absolutely sure where their property line is. And so that is the reason why we're adding that back in there. That is the only change in section 500. Any questions?
Amy, I just have
Yes.
maybe a question followed up by a comment, but the question would be, do not most all variances involve some sort of property line?
The side property line is what we're talking about. So when we are looking at other setbacks, it's either setback from the road, setback from the water, setback from something else. So it's those side property lines. One of the things we discover, especially in Shoreland, is people don't know exactly where those are. So we certainly can add clarifying language to that. If it's not clear, we can say side property line and clarify that.
I think that would be helpful.
Absolutely.
My concern with this is, and this is my comment, the concern is there's a significant cost to having a survey completed prior to a variance request. And if we're gonna require a variant or a survey before we do a variance, we've added a cost there. Could not there be a condition on the variance that a survey be conducted before it proceed?
The difficulty with that, Mr. Chair, is that people need to know what they're asking for. They need to know how close they are to that property line, so you know what the encroachment is. We don't want to have you grant a variance and then find out that it's not, that where they're proposing the structure isn't even on their property. And we learned that the hard way, because we didn't have this language in, and we did have that, where a variance was granted, they indicated where their property line was, and then the improvement was put over the property line, and that was a whole other mess. So there is some responsibility on the applicant to know where their property lines are. If they already have survey stakes or know beyond the shadow of a doubt where they are, then that's one thing. But if they have no idea, they don't even know what to ask for or whether a variance is even needed. We will require a variance for other things too, especially if it's a bluff determination. We'll require a bluff determination be done by a surveyor prior to request of a variance, because sometimes that needs to be defined so we know how to frame the variance request.
And to that, just to follow up on that, I'm glad you stated that if there are survey stakes there, because
Correct.
a lot of times on shoreland, there are survey
Yes.
stakes there.
And if they can find them, then that's acceptable.
Maybe we need to just clarify that better in this language here. If a survey stake could be located, then there wouldn't necessarily be that added
Sure.
cost or burden to the applicant. I'm just trying to look out for those that are, spending a significant amount of money here.
Absolutely. I can definitely, I've made note of those comments.
Thank you.
One thing, just remember, we're talking in ag zoning,
No, this would be variances in general.
variances in general.
Yes, this is variances. If you're looking to encroach on your property line, you need to know where it is.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to comment on this here. I think we've all been at sites in the past that once we got there, they said, well, they thought the property line was there, and it was a lot of if, and so I do see this as a huge advantage that we need to go this route. So I think it's good.
Anything else on section 505.1A? No? Okay, then we'll move on to section 604. I'm just going to update my slide here for you. Okay, so section 604 starts the use charts for the various zoning districts. And 604.1, 2, 3, 4, 5 through 9 pertain to the agriculture zoning district. So this is really some of the bigger changes that are happening in the ag zoning district, starting with the use chart. So in 604.1, the change is really softening the language from precedence to preference as far as for the role of ag in the ag zoning district. Section 604.2 is redefining, instead of saying single-family home as a permitted principal use, we're saying single-family dwelling because that is the defined term. So we're just getting back to our defined terms there. Get to 604.4. These are permitted uses with performance standards. So we're clarifying that the second dwelling allowed would be on the same parcel. And then also allowing a Class B sign, which is a billboard, along state highway right-of-ways without the need for a rezone to commercial. Then we get to section 604.5. Those are conditional uses. With some of the proposed changes, in other sections of the ordinance, we're looking at the duplex, the second dwellings on properties, and this would be allowing a duplex in excess of allowable density with a conditional use permit. And then we're referring to other sections that I'll get to a little bit later. And then also we're allowing a single-family dwelling in excess of the allowable density, which right now is proposed to 3 per quarter, but allowing additional density with a conditional use permit. So those are bigger changes in that. So really the biggest change in this is if someone wants to exceed the allowable dwelling density, it wouldn't be handled through the variance process, it would be handled through the conditional use permit process. All right, and then we get to 604.9, which talks about the design standards for parcel creation. Under density standard, we're looking at keeping the 3 dwellings per quarter for the density, which is 3 dwellings per 40 acres. A person does not have to have 40 acres in order to do that. It's just that's how many within each quarter section we're going to allow. What we're adding here is that caveat that additional density could be allowed with a conditional use permit if an applicant shows that they meet the criteria for a conditional use permit. Lot area, we're looking at reducing that down to a 1 acre minimum rather than a 5 acre, and removing the cluster scenario. I can't think of a time where where my office has handled a cluster development. It isn't utilized and isn't used. And then with a reduction of the lot size, we're looking at a reduction of the lot width minimum going from 200 feet to 150 feet. The other part of the design standards is the impervious surface, the maximum lot coverage and impervious surface allowance. It has been 15%. It's not enforced, and so we're looking to remove that. All right, and then we get to section 604.11, and we're looking at updating that language. We already have a statement in our ordinance. As you can see, it's what's redlined here. It's the statement about residential construction in the ag zoning district. We're looking at updating that language to the underlined language in that section. And then 604.12, we're looking at the Army compatible use buffer area, and we're looking at omitting in item B the statement of or values, because that is hard to prove or know, and so we're looking at striking that from the language. And then 604.13, we're looking at, in this section, we're looking at the second dwelling unit standards. And we're adding the caveat that for a second dwelling on the same piece of property, there needs to be available density within the quarter. So if there's already 3 dwellings in that quarter, there wouldn't, a second dwelling on the same parcel would not be allowed. And then 604.14 is an addition, essentially adding that additional single-family dwellings and duplexes, as we refer in the use chart, that they can be considered with a conditional use permit application. Then section 605, we're looking at removing completely. This is the urban fringe overlay. It applies to the 2.5 mile radius around the city limits. And right now what it allows is someone to create a smaller parcel and enjoy different uses on the property because they're so close to city limits. It's hardly ever used, and with going down to a 1 acre minimum parcel size, there would be no need for an urban fringe overlay. So that's why we're proposing to strike that at this time. Okay, so that's section 605. So that is the agriculture zoning district, that is the use chart, and the minimum design standards. So I'm gonna stop right here and ask if there are any questions by the Planning Commission.
Okay, anybody have any questions on the board or comments?
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Mr. Stish.
Amy, maybe it would be good to review the process we went through to get here, that we had meetings with the commissioners, reviewed all these things. That's probably why we don't have a lot of questions. And also, for the most part, many of these things could have been had with a variance. I mean, a variance process could have attained many of these things that we're changing. Some are going to be over the counter, some will be a CUP process instead of a variance process.
Correct.
So that's an interesting thought, the CUP process versus the variance process.
Okay,
Thank you.
Mr. Brucher.
Yeah, I think that I really, the purpose of changing these rules was to reduce the need for variances. I know talking with because it's a $600 fee for a variance and then coming, where we could just clean up the process and make it smoother for the planning, planning and zoning as well. So I don't think, I think we need to eliminate as many variance requests as we can.
Anybody else before I go on to my rant? Okay, so we met for months off and on doing this. And in our discussions, we talked a lot about smart development for housing and stuff out in this ag district. And I think I missed something because in our talks, we talked about reducing the number from 3 per quarter to possibly 2 or 1 and making houses come in for variances and take away less variances from so-called ag production coming in. So this section really troubles me. I would like to see that from 3 reduced to 2 or 1 per quarter, and also the 1 acre thing I was against from day one. 2.5 acre would at least line up with our rural residential. I don't know why we have to make things so difficult. Plus, it's pretty hard to get something built on 1 acre. Because if you're gonna get 1 acre, now what you did is just made it really affordable for more people to try and live out in the country. And I'm not against people living in the country, but if it is at a cost for the farmer and people doing ag business, then I am. So, I don't know what your guys' comments are on that, but if we were gonna move forward with this before I could even begin to vote yes on this, I gotta at least get that changed to 2.5 acres. So I don't know what your guys' thoughts are.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Mr. Brucher.
I agree with you. You get a 1 acre lot, and what are they gonna do with it? And especially if we get right-of-way considerations as well. A 1 acre lot, half of it's taken up by the county right-of-way. So I agree with you, Mr. Catherine.
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Mr. Stish.
Yeah, I agree too. I'm thinking that if I had 5 acre parcel or 10 acre parcel, and I was under the 3 residences per 40, could split that off. And I don't think that was the intent at all for residential living, was to sell off a parcel and have 3 people living by me rather than only 1. So,
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead, Marv.
I agree with the 2.5 acres, the Common Alliance, and where you're coming from and that. Also, I think, Amy, it would be advantageous, I don't know if everyone understands the COP process versus the variance process, and understand it as the variance, how we could approve it, where this is a recommendation and also going through the county commissioners one more step, so it isn't quite that easy. So I think the crowd should have that explained, please.
Certainly, Mr. Chair. Are there any other comments? So what I have is a request from Mr. Stish to just kind of talk about the background of how did we get here, and then a request from Mr. Treadle to explain the variance versus CUP process. Anything else you'd like me to address at this point?
No, go ahead.
Okay. I see a lot of familiar faces here because we have a lot of township people here and people that have been invested in this process. So I'll be speaking to the choir for some of this. But the driving force behind looking at the ordinance amendments that we are is really the disconnect that we have between our comprehensive land use plan and what we say the role agriculture plays in the county and the importance of it and the set-asides that we're going to make for it versus what we allow in the ordinance. They're not aligned. So the discussion started as, which do we need to change? Do we need to change the ordinance, or do we need to change the comp plan? Has the community feeling changed? And in light of having updated the comp plan back in 2016 and having a lot of public input at that point, we didn't feel we had gotten the comp plan wrong. So that, of course, then pointed to the ordinance to say, okay, we need to align the ordinance to further the goals and objectives of the comprehensive plan. So we embarked on this about 3 years ago almost. This has been a really long process. And the first step was we had a couple of feedlot stakeholder meetings. We brought people to the table that either had directly experienced encroachment or had their property rights affected by feedlots. Feedlot owners that were hamstringed by development around them. And then also people that work in those fields, crop consultants, the Soil and Water Conservation District, NRCS, townships that are very ag heavy. So we had a series of 2 meetings to talk about setbacks and what that looked like and performance standards for feedlots. And also the nitrate issue that we all know, most of us know, that we have. We have hot spots for nitrates in this area. And what, if anything, is the county's role in that? So there are a few things that came out of that meeting that we had taken then also then to the county board. And the county board said, no, we do need to look at this. And we looked at options on, okay, how would we change this? So our initial thought was to take a look at diversifying the ag zoning district. 85% of the county has an ag zoning district assigned to it. That's a really broad brush. That's a lot of land mass for one zoning district. And I think we all can agree that the areas that are zoned agriculture in Scandia Valley Township are very different than the areas that are zoned agriculture in Agrum Township. And maybe recognizing those differences by having more than one zoning district. So that was the initial ask, I guess, was to see what the appetite was for that and input. So then we also met with every township in the county and talked about that. Talked about what each township's long-term plans are. What do you want your township to look like? What do you want to fill in that idle land with? And that was about a year-long process, meeting with all those townships and getting that feedback. We then asked the townships, what do you want to see? What makes the most sense for your community? And we got a real mixed bag. And some didn't respond at all. And what that told the county board was that there maybe wasn't a real strong desire to diversify the zoning districts in the county. But they still were recognizing that something needed to change in the ordinance. So what the directive was at that time was to work within the ordinance framework that we have. So we're no longer pursuing the diversifying of those zoning districts and working within the framework that we have, which is the existing use chart and the design standards for that. Then we had a series of meetings then with our planning commission and with the county board to discuss this further. And a lot of what we carried to those meetings was the feedback that we got from the townships and the comments that we had gotten from the townships during that other process. So what you see before you tonight is really a combination of the discussion, all of the discussion that we've had over the last couple of years, the recommendations of the planning commission, but also the desires of the county board and their reasoning behind that. There's a reason for all of it. So that's where we're at. This did not happen in a vacuum. This was very intensive work. We wanted as much feedback as we could have and get, and we're very glad for this process. And so that's where we're at now and why we're here. For those of you that aren't familiar with zoning all that much, variances are a mechanism within the ordinance that allow people to deviate from the standards. So essentially, almost every provision of this ordinance you can ask for a variance from. You can ask to vary from that. You need to make the case, though. There's statutory requirements you need to meet in order to get a variance, and that bar is fairly high. So with shifting some of these things to a conditional use permit process, the criteria you need to meet is different, and it's not as rigorous of an exercise to get it. It allows the county board and the planning commission to weigh and balance a little bit more than what a variance is. A variance is pretty black and white. A conditional use permit can take into consideration all of the circumstances in that particular area and can make a decision on a case-by-case basis depending on what's going on in that area. So it gives the board a lot more flexibility, and it also gives the applicant more flexibility for what they're pursuing. So those are the biggest differences there. Mr. Chair, is there anything else you'd like me to cover at this point?
Well, I don't think so, you guys. Anything else? Not at this point.
Okay. Is there any other discussion or anything on section 604 before I move on to section 605? Or actually, we talked about 605 and striking the urban fringe district. Any other comment before I move forward? Okay. Well then, Mr. Chair, I'm going to move to section 606, which is rural residential development. And in this section, let me get down to it here. In this section, we're just fixing a typo in the design standards for the maximum lot coverage and impervious surface allowance of 25%. The numeric typo was 25, and the written was 15, so we're just fixing that. No change. Section 707, these are our shoreland standards. Section 707.3, we're clarifying what we require. We're clarifying that a permit is required for stairways, lifts, landings, and mobility paths. We've always required a permit for these. We just needed to clarify it in the ordinance in plain language. So that's what we're doing here. Moving forward. That is what I have for section 700. Anything else before we dive into section 1200? Because this is this gets a little meaty.
I have nothing. Anybody on the board have anything?
No.
No, I think we can move on, Amy.
All right. So section 1200 are performance standards. So anything we allow, any permitted use with performance standards, or any conditional use permit with performance standards, or interim use permit with performance standards, you'll find the standards here. Essentially what performance standards are is we have a use, but then we have some extra things that you need to abide by. And this is where you find those for those various uses. So when we get to section 1202.3 for care facilities, we're essentially just cleaning up. If we are going to remove the urban fringe zoning district, we'd be striking that from the language. And then also, we would be reducing the parcel size for that down to 1 acre to reflect for the care facility that we'd be going down to that minimum parcel size that is proposed in the ag zoning district. Any questions on that before I move on from care facilities? Okay. Okay, the next section is section 1203. That's still performance standards, but it pertains to park models and recreational vehicles. What we're doing there is in section 1203.4. We are cleaning up from the shoreland update. As you may recall, back about a year ago when we overhauled the shoreland district, we removed the shoreland residential and shoreland commercial. So we're just simply cleaning that up and just referring to it as shoreland. And then a little farther down in section B, we're looking at replacing language and redefining the number of recreational vehicles that are allowed on lots. They are an allowed use, but if there is a dwelling with the reduced parcel size, the density would be too high. So what we're looking to change is if it's a vacant lot, they could have 2 recreational vehicles. If there's a dwelling, then no recreational vehicles. Anything on that before I move on? Okay.
Just a question there.
Yes.
Go ahead, Brent.
So we're talking about shoreland here.
No, we're talking about everything but shoreland. So these are the other zoning districts that allow recreational vehicles, which is essentially agriculture.
Okay,
Section 700 addresses recreational vehicles in shoreland specifically. So this section does not apply.
okay, so just to clarify this, if you have a dwelling on that land, you could not have an RV?
Not as a permanent dwelling on top of that.
What would,
If you cite it for 10 days or more.
the defined definition of a dwelling is 10 days or more?
No. If you have a dwelling, so if you have a structure that you're utilizing, we're always looking at use of whatever building you've got. So if you've got a building on the property that you are utilizing as a dwelling, and we won't allow someone to cite an RV there also to serve as like a guest cottage, guest cabin, whatever. It would have to be on a separate parcel.
Longer than 10 days?
Correct. So you can have incidental use, a weekend, things like that. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking if you're permanently siting something to serve as a secondary dwelling.
Okay.
Okay, any other comments or questions on that? Okay. All right, so then we are going to get to probably what everyone is here for. It's coming, I promise. But 1205.2, we're just simply striking urban fringe from that because we're looking at getting rid of that. Now we're going to jump to section 1208, which is small scale feedlots, and these are the performance standards within our small scale feedlot and large scale feedlot. This is where we are going to. This is where kind of the rubber hits the road with this amendment. Before I get into that, I do want to explain how we do our setbacks, just so everyone's clear on how that works. So I'm going to just pull up an example so everyone understands kind of what we're doing here. So this is a feedlot situation here, and just so you know how we take our setbacks. We take our setbacks from the nearest animal holding area to whatever the setback is. So for example, if we have a right-of-way setback, we're going to take the point of the nearest animal holding area to the nearest point of that setback, and that is what that setback is. This is a home. The nearest animal holding area, in this case, it's this barn here. This is a dairy barn right here. To there. That's the setback that feedlot has from that non-feedlot residence. So as we're talking about setbacks and reducing them or changing them, keep in mind, we're not changing how we're taking the setback, it's just reducing the setback itself. Does that make sense? Okay, I just wanted to make sure that was clear so everyone understands what we're doing. Okay, so let me get back here. Okay, so small scale feedlots is the first area. These are our tier 1 feedlots, and these are 50 to 300 animal units. So when we're talking about this, we are talking about registered feedlots, feedlots that meet the MPCA threshold to be registered. So it is not the hobby farm that has 10 head of cattle. We're not talking about a feedlot or a producer that has 75 head of cattle and they exclusively graze them. That's not a feedlot either. So I just want to clarify what we're talking about here, okay? So tier 1, 50 to 300 animal units, registered feedlot. What we're looking at is under other protected waters, we're looking at adding and public ditches. Those are waterways that eventually make themselves to water, lend themselves or get themselves to waters of the state. So we would be adding that. The property line setback for tier 1, we're looking at going from 100 feet from the side property line to 200 feet from the side property line. The reason for that is more often than not, we have a feedlot that starts out as a tier 1 feedlot and they arrange themselves as a tier 1 feedlot, and then they add animal units to go to a tier 2 through 4, which has greater setbacks from the side property line. So right out of the gate, they're a nonconformity. So we wanted to bring the tier 1 side property line setback in line with the rest. So for future development, they're not nonconforming. The other setback that we're looking at is the setback from other existing feedlots. Currently, we have a 660-foot setback from other registered feedlots. We're looking at removing that. The reason for that is generally producers, that is an operational decision that can be made and should be made with things being taken into consideration, such as biosecurity and contract requirements. And so those generally are already considered, and the county feels they don't necessarily need to have a role in determining how far apart those feedlots need to be. And then we're looking at keeping the contiguous parcel size at 20 acres. It might look like it's struck through just with those comments there, but I just wanted to clarify that. We're not looking at changing that minimum parcel size. Also in small-scale feedlots, in 1208.4, we're looking at adding the language that feedlot owners and operators must notify the road authority when hauling manure during road restrictions. This has been a standard condition that we have put on every conditional use permit. It has become so standard that we're suggesting that it just be part of the performance standards. Okay, so that's what I have for small scale feedlots. Any questions on that before I move on to large scale feedlots?
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead, Mr. Stish.
just to clarify again, it's not a feedlot until it's over 50 animal units, correct?
Correct, unless it's in shoreland. If it's in shoreland, then it's 10 animal units.
Okay. And so these setbacks do not apply to a non-feedlot?
That's
Unless
correct.
So 10
That's
cows
correct.
next door?
Yes, if you have 10 cows next door, this is not going to dictate where your barn goes.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else before I move on? All right, I'll move on. All right, so now we're looking at section 1209, 1209.1 specifically, and that is tier 2 through 4. And I'm just going to center this here. All right, so these are some of the bigger changes that we're looking to make. Right now, for tier 2, which starts at 301 animal units, up to tier 4, which is up to 2,500 animal units, we require 1,000 foot setback from non-feedlot residences. So this is not the residence that is located on the feedlot. It's residents that are not associated with the feedlot. We would take that from every residence nearby. Right now, it's at 1,000 feet. The proposal is to reduce that to 660 feet for all tiers. This is in line with surrounding counties that are ag heavy. There was some discussion about removing it altogether. And I think there was varying levels of comfort with that, with the Planning Commission and also with the county board. And so this was seen as a step in the right direction to reducing that burden, but still providing protection and a buffer between incompatible uses. So that is some of the background there. Then again, we're looking, if we bop down to other existing feedlot, we are looking at reducing in these large-scale feedlots the feedlot to feedlot setback, just as we are in the tier 1 scenario. So that is the big change that we're looking at in the large-scale feedlots. The other thing that we're looking at is, right now, you've received an offset rating, and we have a requirement that large-scale feedlots need to come in with a 93% offset rating in order to even put an application forward. With reducing the setbacks, that offset rating may not be able to be obtained. So what we're looking at here is removing the requirement to meet that rating. However, it is still a tool that can be used within the staff report to give you an idea of what that model is saying as far as for what that offset rating would be. So those kind of go hand in hand. That removal goes hand in hand with the reduction in the setback. And then in 1209.6, again, just as in tier 1, the small scale feedlots, looking at adding that standard language that the that feedlot owners and operators notify the road authority when they're hauling manure during road restrictions, as that has been a standard condition. So that is what I have, Mr. Chair, for large-scale feedlots. Anything on that?
You guys have any comments? Or if you got something, you're smiling.
Oh, wait a minute.
Okay, I figured. Go ahead, Mr. Brucher.
Can you explain what you said, if I understood correctly, an offset rating? Is that what I understood? Can you explain that, please?
Offset is a model, it's a modeling tool that we have used for years when considering conditional use permits for feedlots. And we've had a requirement in our ordinance that feedlots, with whatever they're adding, they need to meet a rating. And really what that is, it's a model to predict, and we all know odor is very subjective. What smells delightful to me is absolutely abhorrent to you. So it's a model to try to predict what percentage of the time someone would be bothered or annoyed by odors caused by a feedlot. And it's inputs that you put into this modeling system, the type of barn, the type of technology, the distance from wherever you're measuring to the barn, and it assumes prevailing wind always in that direction. And it spits out this rating. And what we've required is that right out of the gate, in order to even ask for a conditional use permit, that rating needs to come at 91%, which means 91% of the time, someone will not be overly offended or bothered by that. So that's what the offset is. It's still a model that can be run and be provided as part of the staff report, but it would no longer be a requirement for the farm to meet in order to put forward an application.
Thank you very much.
Yes, you're welcome.
Anything, Dave? Okay, I got just a little bit, then we'll get to you guys. So we worked on this. You know, I've been kind of stubborn on some of this, as people know that's been on this committee, but we've all put a lot of work into this. I've put a lot of work into this. Sometimes my comments and some of my ideas that I have and my stubbornness isn't just my opinion. I've talked to an awful lot of producers and people in the last 6-7 months. And when we come to some of this, we had some committees when we worked on this. We had the Performance Standards Committee, we had housing, kind of that decided that 1 acre and let's keep it at 3 houses and per 40 and all that. And then we had a Feedlot Setback committee, and that was myself and Mr. Wilson, Commissioner Wilson, our feedlot person, Robert, Alan Ringwalski. I think Dave Brucher was on that with me. And in our discussions and our consensus was, we did a lot of research, well, not a lot of research, but we had that stakeholder packet that was done 5-6 years ago when the stakeholder were talking about the feedlot. Their consensus was the same as ours, and it's also the same consensus that I have today still from talking to people, is nobody knows how to do it, but we still want to make our setback so that we use your own property and not the neighbor's property. Some of that got alleviated when we went away from the feedlot to feedlot, okay? But other than that, I don't think we're there. But I just want to, so sometimes when I talk, it isn't just my talking with a lot of people. Another one that people are having a hard time with, and I'm having a hard time with, is the 200-foot road right-of-way one. What is it here? 40 feet for a house. If you put up a machine shed, what's it? 40, 50 feet. An animal housing unit, it's got to be 200. I got two roads that border my property. I got a 48-foot right-of-way and a 33-foot right-of-way. So now I got 248 feet and 233 feet that I pay taxes on that I cannot use on my farm. So think about that. And the next neighbor down the road, he could have a house 40 feet away and he could pile junk all the way on, right up to right-of-way. And they're worried about us parking some machinery there 200 feet away. I don't know, I got a hard time with that one, and so do a lot of other people. There's a lot of other people got a little harder opinion on it than I do. But that's just some comments that I've heard in the discussion, and so I don't know, I probably opened up some more discussion on this. You guys got anything to say with that?
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Mr. Stish.
Yeah, I've been on the, both the Planning Commission and Board of Adjustment for 9 years now. Just recently, they were combined to be one committee. Prior to about a year ago, they were two committees. And several in the audience today were on Planning Commission or Board of Adjustment, some on both. But, you know, I always, you know, what seems to, in my opinion, initiate a change would be, you know, the amount of variances. And in those 9 years, there's only been a handful, less than one per year, of variance requests for in the ag area, and in rural residents also, very, very few variance requests. I agree that the fewer variance requests, the better. Obviously, you've resolved the problem some other way, rather than going with a plan that would require a variance. And the variances that have come forward, I think, for the most part, were reasonable and were okayed. But very few variances have come forward in the last 9 years. And so if it isn't broke, why fix it? Though I do agree that some of these changes are good changes and will inspire some changes in the country that could be positive.
Well, I don't want to get in an argument, but one of the variances that got denied because the house was too close. And I was part of that one, and I was for it, so I could disagree. It seems like that housing in ag has more rights than farms in ag, so that's what I see.
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead, Mr. Brucher.
You know, we farm and we had a facility we wanted to put up. And the county feedlot officer at the time told me that the house, we own the house, and, but it's on a separate parcel. And we were not informed that the variance process was there for us, that we would have to tear that house down if we were going to do what we wanted to do. So I wasn't even informed that there was a variance process. And I think a lot of farmers, as a whole, we're pretty rule-abiding people. I think, you know, after the fact variances, I don't recall ever seeing one having to do with agriculture. We deal with them at lake shores all the time. And so I think that this process, I agree with Mr. Catherine that we shouldn't be tied up by somebody else's land or even another house that we own. But and the other thing too with variances is that I work on this board and I have all the respect for everybody on this board now. But going forward, what happens if this board gets packed with 10 years from now, things can change. And we can get a group of anti-animal agriculture people in here, and then that ends it. We've got a chance to clean this up now and not allow it for personal preferences later. That's my argument, and thank you very much for hearing my point.
Go ahead, Marv.
I didn't even get an opportunity to say Mr. Chair, but I understand cleaning some of this up. I've been on this board here, it's been about 3.5 years right now, and here's some of the variances. Something you have to do is listen to the people, and you're not going to keep everyone happy. And here, by dropping it down from 1,000 to 660, we're what I've heard from others, we're getting in alignment with other counties, surrounding counties, which makes sense. Here, I've heard individuals that, you know, you're going to have that lived out in the country, and they get these smells, they have things that happen, and they're complaining. And how do you keep a balance? And something that I notice, most regulations come because mistakes others have made. And then they put in this here setbacks, put in these regulations and laws. And it's a matter of respect for neighbors. 90% of people will do that, but it's for that reason that these regulations have been put in place. Backing off some of these, making it more compatible for ag, I fully understand it, respect it, I'm all for that end of it. And that's what I've been hearing from other individuals. And the one that I hear over and over about is the hog facilities, the smell. Please don't change that. Please don't change that. And that didn't get changed here as of so far. Thank you.
Thank you, Marv. If you guys don't have nothing else to move on, Brent, you go ahead.
Sure, I've got just a comment. I think this cuts both ways. If you have three per quarter, and somebody wants to build a residential home, and we're going to reduce it to 1 acre or 2.5 acres, that has potential of causing a problem for somebody that wants to either establish their feedlot or expand their feedlot. So let's not lose sight of that as well. This thing cuts both ways, and whatever we do with one is going to affect the other. So this is not an easy. This isn't an easy process.
Okay, thank you guys for your comments. I think we can just move on, Amy.
All right, Mr. Chair. Okay, so get through here. So then, let's see, what do we got? The next one. This is still performance standards. I'll just get to the citation for you, Mr. Chair. We are at 1220.4, and these are performance standards for signs. And when we look at item number 8, it was, we were looking at the purpose of the sign, and with the setback that we were requiring, it's really not visible. So what we're looking at is that we are allowing those signs to be located outside the road right-of-way, but are not required to meet structural setback from the road right-of-way. For example, if you have a sign for a small business, but it needs to be 40 feet off the road right-of-way, you're not really meeting the intent of the sign. So it needs to be completely out of the right-of-way, but not meet the structural setback. So that is a change there. Anything on that? No? Okay. So then we're going to move on to section 1300, and that is our septic system requirements. What we're looking at here is a change to 1301.27, and these are the triggers for compliance inspections. We do, in item 4, you'll see that we do allow a winter agreement. So if someone is proposing a project that requires the need for a septic inspection, but it's during winter months where ground is frozen, we will allow someone to enter into a written agreement that says we're not holding up the permitting process, but they are essentially attesting that they will get the septic system inspected by June 1 of that following year. The only caveat to that we're adding here is that would only be allowed on previously developed lots where the viability of a septic system is known. So we would not allow this on new construction where we don't know if someone can get a septic system in there. We won't put the cart before the horse for permitting for that. So that's the change we're looking at there, Mr. Chair. And then the other part is our grid. When we had updated our setbacks in Shoreland, we had neglected to update this chart. So this chart is essentially just being updated to what we had changed in our Shoreland ordinance section about a year ago. Any questions there? Okay.
Oh, move along.
Okay, so then section 1500 is our subdivision ordinance, and this is how parcel get created and some of the standards we require for new parcel creation. What we're looking at here is section 1501.4, and this talks about land suitability. We are inserting this. This is in line with the septic code, Minnesota septic code, that at the time of lot creation, it needs to be known whether two suitable soil treatment sites that can support a type 1 system are there. So that would be a requirement of someone who is creating a new lot to know right out of the gate whether or not they can get a type 1 system in. As you know, we've had quite a few variance requests for this because we have had splits that have occurred without knowing that information, and then they come to the permitting counter and find that out. So this would put that requirement beforehand, unless, and then we have a little caveat there, unless it's not going to be used for development, then they can put a deed restriction on and go ahead and split the lot without doing that septic work. To remove the deed restriction, they would need to do the septic work, the septic soils work. And that is really for protection for all parties. And then 1501.5, this is actual existing language requiring a residual deed, but we are just clarifying that language and extending it for all splits, not just meets and bounds splits. And so this is just cleaning up after we had this language in place and kind of put it into practice. We had some scenarios where we knew we needed to clarify that language, so we're doing that here. And then, Mr. Chair, along with that, then, in the meets and bounds subdivision area, we're just removing that language because it's applying to all splits, not just meets and bounds. So we're just essentially relocating that language. And Mr. Chair, that is number one, it for section 1500, and that is it for all of the ordinance amendments that we're looking at.
Okay. Anybody on the planning commission have any more comments or questions at this time? Okay, at this time, I'm going to open up the public comment. Go ahead, Amy.
Mr. Chair, if you don't mind, as I know you're opening this up, but I did receive 2 written comments. I did forward them on to you and to the county board of commissioners. However, I just wanted to enter into the record that we do have 2 written comments.
Yes.
And then my question to the board is, would you like me to read those onto the record?
Probably should read them.
Okay.
Sure.
All right, so I will go ahead and do that. So the first one is from Anthony Hennon, which is the county engineer for Morrison County. And he submitted this letter regarding this meeting tonight. So this is directed to the Morrison County Planning Commission. Please review my comments below on the proposed amendments to the Morrison County zoning ordinance, sections 1208 and 1209, as requested by the Morrison County Planning Commission. There was a request for him to clarify his position on maintaining that 200-foot setback from the road right-of-way. So this is in response to that request. Maintaining current minimum setbacks from road right-of-way as noted in zoning ordinance sections 1208, small-scale feedlots, and 1209, large-scale feedlots, is imperative to protecting Morrison County infrastructure and providing a uniform landscape throughout Morrison County. Current setbacks safeguard against significant interruption to feedlot operation in the event future highway demands require additional road width and highway right-of-way. Existing setbacks also make it highly unlikely to have right-of-way expansion require a structure removal or relocation, keeping right-of-way acquisition costs within reason for the constituents of Morrison County. From observances throughout the county, it is apparent that feedlot operations entail complex site layouts that go beyond a simple structure. Often, additional feedlot features that are not encompassed inside the zoning ordinance encroach toward the highway, such as feed storage, manure storage, propane, farm equipment, parking. If the ordinance were to reduce current setbacks, Morrison County runs the risk of having these items impact the safety of the traveling public. If a property has specific hardships from this current setback, the Planning Commission has a variance process in place to review and provide exemptions. During the variance process, a thorough review can be made to either grant or deny the request. If needed, additional conditional use language can be added to the variance to limit any items not covered by the ordinance from making significant encroachments towards the highway. Please take these comments into consideration while evaluating the proposed amendments. Okay. And then the other written comment that I received was from Paul Kuski, and I'll read that. Commissioners, this was directed to the commissioners, and it also forwarded it to you as well. As a rural resident, I have experienced the implementation of the Morrison County setback rule as it applies to the placement of a chicken barn in this example. The barn is situated on a neighboring property 1,000 feet from my residence. Approximately 600 feet of that setback involves my own property, so a person could look at the situation as part of my property because of the setback is now within the 1,000-foot distance and could be precluded from use to build a residence. This has been a concern with adjoining landowners to a feedlot situation. The setback could preclude them from being able to use their property the way they would like. I think first we need to look at the reason for the setback. I believe the first intention of the setback is to preserve quality of life for rural residents and reduce conflict that could arise between agriculture producers and rural residents. Rural residents must accommodate agriculture, and agriculture must accommodate rural residents. It's a give and take situation. This rule was developed to prevent someone from placing a feedlot too close to a residence, which has the potential to affect visual and olfactory senses, both having an impact on quality of living. I realize that discussions on this topic often bring up the issue of how far from a property line should these feedlots be placed. I want to look at both of these. I have spent much time thinking about this whole issue and have actually come to change my mind some from my original thinking. Looking at the big picture, the 1,000-foot setback should not be looked at as using someone else's property for another person to create an agriculture opportunity. It should be viewed as a means of creating a buffer between ag and residences. I believe it is the right thing to do. It reduces conflict. That should be the goal of the county, to minimize conflict between ag and rural residents. The setback from property line, I believe, is not really that important as the setback from a residence. I think we need to separate thought on those two aspects. So the argument continues, though, that the setback may preclude me from using part of my property for the purpose of building a residence someday. Yes, true. Do we wait to see what the future will bring, or do we address the needs of a person's today? I might want to split off part of my property to build another residence, or I might want to build a residence on my 40 acres next to my farmer neighbor, but it isn't happening today, or may never happen. Yet my farmer neighbor wants to provide a source of income for himself with a chicken barn. The opportunity is there to do that. Why deny him? Or why deny a person from building a house on their property that may indeed preclude a farmer from using some of their property someday for a chicken barn? It's a two-way street. I believe it kind of comes down to first come, first serve. The first person to submit a project proposal is first in line to use his property the way the rules allow. The next person in line may have to use the variance system. Yes, the variance system, the mechanism that allows to provide exceptions to the rule. We can't say no to a project because a neighbor may want to build a house someday. If the present rules say okay, then it should be permitted, even if it might put restrictions on another person's property. I received a 1,000-foot buffer between my residence and a chicken barn. I should be happy with that. I also received a restriction placed on my part of my property that may preclude me from using it to build on. That's a maybe thing. I can, if I want, apply for a variance. That is how the system works. That is the adjustment that the rural resident or a farmer might have to accept. So I believe the 1,000-foot setback is a good thing. It should be left in place and should not be looked at as using someone else's property to gain a project, but should be viewed as providing buffer that enhances quality of life and reduces potential conflicts. Also, the setback should not be reduced to 660 feet, as I have heard some other counties may have. This will create more conflict for the county to resolve, in my opinion, create more situations for civil unrest between neighbors. Morrison County should show they care for their rural residents and ag producers alike by having a proper buffer to provide for civil living and working arrangements for people. I've also heard the discussion of reducing the size of acreage that a person can build a residence on a county in rural county areas. Currently, the rule is 5 acres. I believe that is correct, and the proposal is to reduce that to 1 acre. I thought we are seeing this being changed to larger parcels in other counties for the reason to preserve wild and environmentally sensitive areas and to reduce conflict between agriculture and rural residents. I understand the county might want to give the ability for people to use their rural property to live on, build on, but reducing the minimum lot size from 5 to 1 acre, I simply see this creating more problems and conflicts for agriculture operations. I might be missing some reasoning here, but this doesn't seem logical. Is this an attempt to create more tax base? I see this as creating poor living and working conditions and providing more conflict for farmers. Rural living is desirable and should be made feasible, but agriculture must also take a front seat, first consideration in this situation or argument. Thank you for all you do. I appreciate you listening to me. And respectfully, Paul Kuski. So those are the 2 comments that I received, Mr. Chair. And then I just wanted to get those on the record before you opened it up.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we're gonna open up the public comment. If anybody would have any public comment, you can go up to the podium, state your name for the record. I'm not gonna time you, but please don't tell us stories. If you got questions or comments, we wanna hear them, but we don't need an hour-long discussion. And just so you know, you guys got questions, direct them questions to me. We're gonna write them down. After we're all done, we'll answer them questions, okay? So.
Yes. You'll have to
Hold the
pull
mic up to your mouth.
You'll have to pull it nice and close.
Yep.
My name is Don Strummer. I'm in Cushing Township. I live across from a chicken farm, and the variance wasn't there when I built. And now I want to put a little lien on the site, and they want to charge us $600 for a variance. To me, the chicken barn doesn't put off enough, cause anything for a variance. That's my feeling, and I'd like to see the setback changed.
Okay. We'll address that when we're done with the comments. Thank you very much for your comment.
Pull that right up.
Is that all? Okay.
My name is Pat Casella. I have a couple of comments. One regarding the tier 2 through 4. If a feedlot has 2 dwellings, does that affect the distance that is that considered a non-feedlot residence, or how does that fit into the distance picture? And the second thing is regarding the residual deeds. I would like the requirement to remain meets and bounds descriptions. I don't see the need for, most of the egg property is quarters, sections or more. To do a residual deed for, if you were to sell off 40 acres or something, we all know it's, a north half or a south half and less that quarter or something. It's creating a lot of additional recording fees, attorney's fees, and it's going to eventually, I believe, cause some title problems when people attempt to do these deeds themselves to save money by not having it titled the way they were, whether it was joint tenants or tenants in common. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Dan Meyer from Lee Township Supervisor. I met with Amy at least a year ago or so on the agricultural deal. On 605.5 on the response, I thought they had a pretty good response. As I recall on the numbers, I had about 55% of the townships wanted to remain the same on the egg. 35% went with A120, which what we went with. 5% went to A160. About 2% were undecided because of they wanted more feedback, which a lot of the townships wanted feedback from the commissioners on setbacks on feedlots, which is a pretty big topic tonight. As far as the small feedlot setbacks, reducing them, I could see how a farmer, which I have beef cattle myself, would help them on their operation. But I agree with some of the other people that that's fine as long as you don't encroach and use other people's property for their setback. And I think when commissioners and stuff grant permit, that they should take that into consideration. And on Amy, on your 1208, where you have the comment on a small feedlot to go from 100 feet, or you're going to reduce it to 200 feet, you have add in to include public ditches. Is that using that ditch then for that measurement, or how is that pertain that? And notifying road authorities on manure, that's kind of always been a standard. But then where do you go from that? Like if on road restrictions, is that usually you give them on the township, give them permission to do that, or do you charge them adequate damage to that road right away? Was one of my concerns, because we have had that in our township. And it's not even just manure, it's in the fall on hauling excessive loads to a particular farm, you know, and you could talk with the farmer too, to if they want to maybe just, sometimes we have them fix the road themselves with their own equipment, which whatever. Other than that, there was one other ordinance that I was concerned with, which was the one on recreational use, where you had a 10-day use on a dwelling, and you got a camper. Well, if you have people come from out of state or out of town, I think a 10-day is not even feasible, because most of the time people, when they come from far away, is way more than 10 days. So, thank you.
Good evening, Ron Miller, and I would like to speak on one of the standards you have in here, which is the 1209.4 on the size restriction. I heard there was talk that, you know, we have a board that's somewhat egg-friendly right now, and that down the road, you know, we're concerned that if it gets not so egg-friendly, you know, we're going to have more conditions. And as you can see by the conditions already that we have from section 1209.3 and on down through there all the way to A to M, that there's a lot of requirements that animal agriculture has to meet in order to place a barn. And you don't see more and more animal agriculture going on there. Actually, it seems to be less and less farms, but larger farms. And having a size restriction actually, I think, goes in the face of our Comm plan. our comp plan, if you read through it, we want to be egg friendly. And to have that restriction in there, which limits future animal agriculture, I think is an issue that should be addressed at this time with you guys going through this process. And you talk about you want to be more in line with surrounding counties. I heard the comment from you guys up there. You know, any feedlot that goes over 1,000 animal units has to go through MPCA permitting. And through that process, you have to be able to show that you have the acres, you have the whereward to handle this operation. You have to be able to meet both a phosphorus and a nitrogen acres to spread that manure. And all your soil tests, you cannot spread manure on certain acres if their phosphorus is up in the upper limits. It has to go to every third year. So I think you guys should really look at that section right there and have it more in line with the surrounding counties. I think you're really putting a burden on the livestock farmer by having that restriction in there. Thank you.
It's interesting, 2 years ago,
Can you state your name for the record, please?
Mr. Chair, this is Chuck Perrin's Little Falls Township. I just thought it was interesting that 2 years ago, we had to wipe down every pen that we touched with alcohol, and now we get to share everything again. If you can beg me a little bit of leeway here, just on the definitions, it would just be helpful, as long as this is an opportunity, is when you talk about animals, exotic and dangerous, it'd be nice if you put invasive species, non-native or controlled animals in there as well, just to help us, you know, sort of manage the stuff that's in the townships. And the same thing, if I could beg that you take a look at unlicensed vehicles and bring that from 3 down to 2, but those are kind of broad scope otherwise. Okay, I was looking at the ag district. You know, in general, we've got a comp plan in Little Falls Township that favors a larger split for dwellings. You know, we've got a number of 2.5 acres, and it seems a little bit odd to go down to 1, although I understand, because I too have talked to a number of farmers that say that, you know, they might have a center pivot and they want 4 corners that they can put an acre and 4 houses on it. But, you know, when you look at, we've gotten rid of the urban fringe, so I'd need some education or some guidance on how we now would approach favorably looking at rural residential at 2.5, and I don't know what design or designates a district entirely, but now we're allowing 1 acre in ag, and I get that. It seems like an odd juxtaposition between, you know, thought processes, but, you know, if you got 4 corners on a center pivot, maybe it makes great sense, but I'd like maybe to get a little bit more insight on how we'd work that through, thinking about we're doing rural residential district at 2.5, and then we're allowing 1 in ag. So that's one comment there. The 3 dwellings per acre, that kind of was addressed. Again, it seems to me then, if I understand, well, it's quarter, so I'm sorry, I got a little confused on that. If you had 1 acre, you could, I guess, have all 4 corners. The in ag district, if the 15%, I don't know what the logic was on 15% impervious surface anyway. I would like to know what other, what other control measures are even relevant then with an ag district for impervious surface across time, if it's, distance or for property lines and all those sorts of things for impervious surface. Again, the rural residential districts seem to be less restrictive when we got rid of the urban fringe. And I'm thinking that we either need to clarify it or just have a better way of delineating what would make a rural residential district versus, continuous or allowing 1 acre residences with an ag. The RVs, I know that Amy had commented that there was, it was in ag districts, I believe, in 1203, but it didn't address the rural residential in that case. And I'd like to know if we could address it as inclusive with the rural residential, because even in certain platted areas, I know that, like Enchanted Lakes, for example, you have multiple units that are used as dwellings in some of those areas on it, and it goes beyond the amount of time. And I believe that was my comments. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Myron Check from Pike Creek Township. I'd just like to comment on two of the things that were touched on tonight. One of them being the 660-foot setback. I think it'd be an excellent idea to enact that. It was mentioned earlier by one of the board members that not very many variances have been applied for, but I think that's because people are afraid to apply for variances. We had a case on a feedlot where a neighbor applied for a variance to build a house closer than 1,000 feet. So we were faced with a dilemma. Do we try to fight that in any way to prevent that setback from coming back to bite us and risk making that neighbor into almost an enemy of the feedlot? So there are so many considerations that come into play before we even think about, and I think for most people, before you even think about applying for a variance. So don't let that be the lack of variances be a guide, I would say. So, and the other thing I'd like to comment on is the 200-foot setback from a road. I listened to the points in the letter that was written, and some of them are valid, but 200 feet is pretty excessive. And if you're like me when you drive in the country, and I do it quite a bit, to me the most beautiful thing to see is the feedlots that you drive by. And the closer they are to the road, the better for me. So, and just to touch on a thing that we didn't talk about tonight, that was also mentioned in the comments, was the feedlot, the animal unit cap. That's something that we'll have to, at some point, address. It won't affect a large amount of people in the county, but those that it will affect, it'll affect in a big way. So any future planning that you can do looking at that would be appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Gene Young, Little Falls Township. And I guess my question was, I don't know why you'd want to go to 1 acre either. And they've come up about survey, and at one time we required any time anybody sold a piece off of a 40, they surveyed it. And you'd think it's expensive, but $2,500 because I done it. And had lakeshore lots involved and had a property description that had been there for 15 years and it wasn't even legal. So we had to do away with it and that. So it's really a cheap insurance policy and it's on survey of record of what you're trying to do. I think it really does clarify it for everybody and keeps you out of court because I've seen people spend a lot of money in the argument and become enemies over it. But I can't see 2.5 1 acre lots out in the ag area whatsoever. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more public comment?
Good evening. I'm Terry Hargrave, Granite Township, and I have a real issue with going down to that 1 acre lot, or acre size. To me, I know as the board, we talked that we'd like to see it 20 acres, but at least 5 acres is, usable. Where a 1 acre lot out there, there's no way you can hardly build on it with your setbacks and everything. And it's just in my opinion and stuff. And now, does this override any of the township regulations that we have? If we've got a 5 acre set or a 5 acre requirement for a house, does this thing override that? If you go down to the 1 acre lot?
Thank you. Any other public comment? Any other public comment? I'm going to ask one more time. Any other public comment? If hearing none, we'll close this portion of the meeting to public comment. I'll maybe answer one or two of these, and then I'll probably turn it over to Amy for the majority of it. I'll tackle the 1 acre thing a little bit. Well, maybe not. We'll tackle the cap first. That animal cap was discussed in our talks, and I thought it was a consensus that we were going to drop it. I don't know how it didn't make it to this. One more meeting that the commissioners had, so maybe they know more about that than us. But it was talked about to drop the cap. I don't know what happened with that. The 1 acre deal, it was talked extensively about 2.5 and ended up being 1 acre for some reason. But our reasoning was that hopefully they wouldn't build out in, well, we called it smart development. We're hoping that maybe with 2.5 acres or something like that, they could put that up somewhere maybe that we can't farm, or it's rolly land or a corner of a pivot or things like that, instead of people building a house out in the middle of a 40. That was kind of my whole thought when I ranted a little bit about that 1 acre I thought should be 2.5, and I also thought we should drop it from 3 per quarter to 1 or 2 and make them have a variance, because then you have more control of where them houses could get built instead of just having 2.5 acre houses wherever. Granted, they could have 100 acres and still build it, but that's just some of the reasonings why we thought, going through this, that if we downsize the acreage size, that we could utilize some of these other areas, and instead of trying to protect some more of our farmland. Other than that, the rest of these, I'm going to have to probably have Amy go through them. You're more expertise than I even can think of. So Amy, if you want to tackle some of them, go ahead.
I sure can. I'll add to the 1 acre first. This was talked about a lot. Minimum acreage, minimum parcel size. And I guess there's 2 schools of thought with that. One, in the ag zoning district, go big or go home. If you're gonna own property out in the agricultural zoning district, you should have 40 acres. Call it good. And then the other one is, depending on why you own it and what you use it for, and how much of that will remain idle and not productive land if we require a larger minimum parcel size. So those are the 2 schools of thought, really, going back and forth. And one thing I want to clarify is it's not mandatory to have a 1 acre piece. So when we say the minimum acreage or the minimum parcel size is 1 acre, that doesn't mean that the only size you can have is 1 acre. If you want a 2.5 acre piece, then buy a 2.5 acre piece. really what we're looking at, and this kind of came from the assessing side of things too, is we consider a site, that 1 acre. Because when you look at the development pattern, or residential development pattern at least, typically, they're going to site their home and their garage and their septic and their well in that tight little spot, in a tight spot, and then the rest is idle. And it may collect cars, or it may collect garbage, or it may collect all sorts of treasures. Not to say that every property is junk, but it takes land that could be productive ag land out of production. So the thought process is that if you allow that parcel size to go down to that 1 acre, where someone can accommodate a home and their garage and their septic and utilities, the rest could be left alone for productive ag land. And also, it could be tucked in some of those unproductive ag pieces where a farmer might have an ideal spot that they would split off and sell, that is the highest and best use is for a home. And being able to minimize that area that they need to carve out for that would minimize and take the least amount of land out of production. So that really was the thought process of going down, or allowing at least to go down to that 1 acre. It gives the most flexibility for that while preserving agricultural land. So, okay. So then that kind of marries into the next question was, does that 1 acre minimum override township regulations if the township has a minimum parcel size? We administer the zoning for the townships. So townships in Morrison County, the county administers that zoning. So the minimum standard is the Morrison County Land Use Control Ordinance. If a township is wanting to administer their own zoning, then they would need to formally take that back, and then have their own zoning ordinance and planning commission and board of adjustment and all of that. The minimum standard then would become the county's ordinance. So long story, we don't recognize minimum standards that a township may have from a policy standpoint, and we don't enforce those. If the township, as the road authority, has some standards on their driveway entrances, driveway width, where a driveway is put, all of that, that is your jurisdiction. We don't regulate that. So I think that's the answer for that. The question also was then where, with that public ditch, with adding public ditches, where is that measurement taking? It would be taken from the top of bank. So of course you've got your ditch, and we're taking top of bank is where that setback would come from, just like any other, we'd treat it like any other water body. Let's see, manure hauling, there were some questions regarding the requirement to notify the road authority during road restrictions for manure hauling, but what else is happening? When farmers are hauling during road restrictions, we have that built in, and that had come from years and years of recommendations from road authorities to be notified when road restrictions are on, as far as when hauling activities were happening, so they could monitor the condition of the road. And so they would know who the responsible party would be if there was some damage, because they'd know, oh, we know this person was hauling. The other mechanisms, you as from a township standpoint, as a road authority, you have that ability to, if someone has damaged your road, you have that ability now to handle that as you see fit, as far as requiring repair and whose responsibility that is. That's not generally, I don't have jurisdiction, or the county does not have jurisdiction in your road right of way. or your road surface. So that would fall on your respective road authorities for handling that. Let's see. Then there was a question if there are 2 feedlot residences. So if there's 2 residences on a feedlot, how does the setback measurement work? If we are recognizing both feedlots as associated with that feedlot, we don't measure the setback from those residences. It would just be what's considered the non-feedlot residence. So it would be the residences that are not associated with that feedlot. So whether there's 1 or 2 residences, it wouldn't matter. Impervious surface control measures in the ag district. I think there's a few mechanisms in there. When we're looking at our registered feedlots, we are looking at stormwater movement, stormwater runoff, and then also when those feedlots get to the point where they are under MPCA jurisdiction, then there's zero discharge. So that really takes care of itself in that arena. With the larger setbacks that we have in the agriculture zoning district, as far as 25 feet from the side property line, 40 feet from the road right of way, all of that, then stormwater is generally controlled. We do have caveats within our ordinance that we're looking at that, and then also with some of the conditions that we're putting on some of these big barns for buffering around those barns to control that stormwater and impact to infrastructure. So that is what some of the things that we have other than just a straight up impervious surface calc that happens on those properties. Let's see. And then I think I may have answered the rural residential minimum parcel size versus the ag minimum parcel size, and I guess the rationale of going down to that 1 acre minimum size. Mr. Chair, that's all I had written down for questions. Did I miss anything?
Yeah. Could you talk about the cap?
Oh, the animal unit cap, yes. That was discussed quite a few times, the animal unit cap. And I think and it was a heavier discussion when we were looking at diversifying the zoning districts. So having more than one ag zoning district, and where there would be a zoning district that really was more feedlot ag production centered, then I think there was no question that animal unit cap would have been removed, because that really was what that area in the county was going to be set aside for. When we went back to working within the framework of the existing ordinance and the mixed thoughts about even just the reduction of the setback from the non-feedlot residences, coupling that then with lifting the animal unit cap at the same time, I think was more than what we wanted to bite off at this moment. I think this ordinance amendment certainly moves us towards the direction of being more in line with our goals and objectives. But that doesn't mean this is necessarily the last time we're going to be looking at this. So it definitely was talked about when we had the change in our approach. It kind of came off the table. I think the other question then for that would be at what points would we be wanting to, at what animal unit increments would we want to be looking at under a CUP process? And so that would be a whole retooling of our tiers and all that. I don't think that discussion is over. I don't think that it was off the table. It just didn't make it into this amendment.
Came in, then Don from Cushing had that, what's this setback?
Which one?
With his chicken barn and his addition.
Okay.
Kind of maybe.
I don't know the specifics of that one, but my guess is there's an expansion proposed on a residence that would further encroach on the setback from a chicken barn, and lessening those setbacks might alleviate the need for the variance. So I guess my understanding was that he was supportive of reducing those setbacks because that would help that situation. And so that is always, one of the things I'll clarify is we have it in the ordinance now and we intend to keep it, is for dwellings that do not meet the setback from a feedlot, they are allowed to expand without a variance as long as they are not further encroaching on that setback. So say the encroachment is the north end of the house and that's too close to the feedlot, but if they're proposing to add on to the south, that can be accomplished with a permit. No variance is needed. So it's only when they're going to further encroach on that setback is when the variance comes into play. So I think that was it, Mr. Chair. Did I miss
Chair.
anything else?
Could you just add to that too, that it just affects the dwelling, not other structures on the property?
That's correct. The feedlot to non-feedlot resident setback doesn't apply to the pole shed or to the detached garage or to the chicken coop or anything else. It's just the residence.
Okay. So I guess just for Don's, maybe go talk with Land Services, see how this proposes work out. Maybe talk to Land Services and get your thing figured out. But anybody have anything on the board here? Any more comments before we move to a vote?
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead, Marv.
I heard a couple comments made about the 200-foot setback from the road, not liking that, how we became or got there, and if there's ability to reduce that.
So, Mr. Chair, I did note that. Thank you for bringing that up. I did note that. And so really where we're at now is you've heard the public comment, and then this is where you would make a recommendation to the county board either to adopt this amendment as is, or to adopt with some minor changes, or you would be making a recommendation that there would be certain things that would need to be addressed further before adoption. And then that would then be considered by the county board. And if there are substantial changes, it would come back to public hearing and be heard again and have comments again before the county board would look at adopting.
Okay, so Amy, a substantial change, would that be if we'd recommend 2.5 acres instead of 1?
Yes, 2.5
That's
acres instead
substantial.
of 1 if you're looking at reducing the setback from the county road right-of-way.
Yes.
If you're looking at changing the dwelling density, if you're looking at removing the animal unit cap, those would all be changes that would rise to the level of needing to come back for public hearing again.
So then we could just make a motion to,
Recommend further
Yes.
study into this, and this, and what your recommendation may be.
you guys get that all?
Can you clarify?
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead, Dave.
one way we could look at it is to move it forward, or to recommend to move forward as is, or not to move forward as is. Simple as that.
Yeah.
Or we could add specific changes that we recommend to move forward. What do we want to do?
But
Mr. Chair, if your recommendation is going to be not to move forward, I think for clarity's sake, then you should identify the areas that need further study. Otherwise, you're not narrowing that for the county board at all, as far as to know, okay, what exactly do we need to be looking at? So I would recommend that you do identify things that need further study, further information, further discussion.
Mr. Chairman,
go ahead, Mr. Brucher.
can we identify, just specifically identify those? Can we clear them up tonight or not?
Mr. Chair, if you're looking at changing the minimum parcel size or animal unit cap or anything, those are substantial changes that would need to be re-advertised and reheard. That isn't something that you can make a recommendation to the county board that they not adopt this and that they look at this, and this. And then when the county board takes that under advisement, then they'll decide what, if any of that, they want to change. And if they decide to, then that would come back before you again for another public hearing.
Thank you very much, ma'am.
Yes.
Well, Mr. Chair, I'll break the ice. I'd say we'd recommend to move forward with 2.5 acres as the minimum parcel size and to remove the animal unit cap. I think all the other recommendations that are brought forward.
How about look at the road right away? Would you add that to that?
We look at is kind of vague, but yeah.
Well, you're gonna look at the 2.5, you're gonna look at the animal cap, so.
Well, animal cap remove, 2.5 acres versus 1.
Oh.
Looking at right away, 100 feet, 150 feet, recommendation, or just reducing that. That might be a good way to move forward.
So you'd add that to it, just reduce?
Mr. Chair?
Not yet, I don't think.
Go ahead, Marv.
I agree with the dropping that, or moving from what I've heard from others and our feelings with that 1 acre to 2.5 acres, and then reducing the setback from the road from the 200 feet to what, like a neighboring county or whatever would be. I'm thinking 150 feet, but, you know, everybody may have their own opinion, but looking at that, I believe that needs to be explored.
Any more discussion, or we can get ready for a motion, or?
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead, Brent.
I think we also need to look at this vacant lot, 2 RVs, and a dwelling lot with no RVs as well. I think there needs to be some more clarification there, and we heard somebody mention that here tonight as well. And just give me a minute, I had one more comment here, so I'm trying to find it.
Okay, so far we have 2.5 acres instead of the 1. Maybe removing the animal cap, look at the road right away, decreasing that setback, and then clarifying a little more verbiage on the 2 RVs and the dwelling.
Yep, Mr. Chair, that's what I have written down.
Mr. Chair, I did find my notes.
Okay, go ahead, Brent.
The other one I did bring up earlier, and it was regarding the survey.
Yes.
And the requirement of the survey, and if survey markers were found in sidelines.
Yes.
I think we need to fine tune the language there, I guess, is maybe the best way to explain that.
Okay. That it? Make a motion.
Yeah. Could we have Amy repeat those?
Yes.
And then maybe we can make a motion and get going?
Absolutely. So what I have written down is a recommendation for the county board to reconsider the minimum parcel size to 2.5 acres, remove the animal unit cap, reduce the setback from the road right-of-way for feedlots, reconsider and clarify the number of recreational vehicles allowed on agricultural lots, and clarify the language for the side property line survey in conjunction with variances.
Mr. Chair, I'd make that motion.
Mr. Chair, I'd second that.
Okay, there's a motion made and seconded with them 5 items that we'd recommend to the commissioners that we'd only want to move forward if we can look at them. All in favor, say aye. Marv?
Aye.
Brent?
Aye.
Dave?
Aye.
Preacher? Dave Stish?
Aye.
Clint Catherine, myself is aye. Okay, passes, so we'll recommend that to the commissioners. Thank everybody for their time, for their input. Thank you to the board, everybody for the hard work they put into this. It's a process.
Want to take a 5-minute recess, Mr. Chair?
We're gonna take 5 minutes. If you guys wanna leave, go ahead. That way it'll get a little quieter. If you wanna stay, that's fine. But I know it's hard when everybody's leaving to do the next meeting, but we'll get 5 minutes and then we'll start up with our, next one on the lineup, and that is the Joe and Nancy Berg properties.